Thanks, Rad. Thanks, Acme. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here so early in the morning. It feels like the second or third time I've done a talk right after Rad introduced me. I feel like the energy, is not set the expectations for my energy, sorry, because it's a lot lower, but let's see how we go. Really excited to be here. Before I get started, I also just want to acknowledge traditional owners of the lands we're meeting, the Wurundjeri people, and from where I live and do all my work, which is up in Meanjin in Brisbane, the Turrbal and Yagara people. So pay my respects to all elders past and present. Acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded and that we're meeting on stolen Aboriginal land. Also, before I start, I also want to express my ongoing solidarity with the people of Palestine, who continue to show bravery and resilience in the face of Israel's brutal and ongoing genocide that is materially supported by our own government. From the rallies for the last over 2 years now, we see most Australians stand on the side of peace and compassion, and hopefully our government kind of comes to that side of the table sometime soon. This has nothing to do with this talk, but I think it's crucial we constantly acknowledge it and that don't let this genocide become normal. Anyway, all right, but as I said, nothing to do with this talk. I'm going to talk about, as Rad said, just the skill sets and mindsets needed and not needed for a career in game development. A little bit about me first, so you know why you should or maybe shouldn't listen to me about these things. I'm primarily an academic. I'm a researcher at Queensland University of Technology up in Brisbane. I research the games industry. I've done that for about a decade-ish. I've interviewed many Australian game developers, gone to many conferences, talked to people about their careers. I used to teach game development. I do make games myself, but not in a capacity where I need to worry if I make money or not, which is a very privileged position to be in. And I'm a co-founder of Squiggly River Game Collective, which is an organisation, the slides are there too, cool, which is a kind of hobbyist community up in Brisbane where we catch up once a month and just see what everybody's working on, and it's really great. So this is, I guess I have this access to this kind of really zoomed out. I've spoken to a lot of people about their video game careers at all different scales, from indie to AAA to hobbyist and everything else. And so the kind of expert perspective I bring is probably less my own story, and you'll hear that from a lot of other great speakers today, and more just from being around for a long time, this seems to be a good way to get started and not started, especially speaking to students and junior researchers. So that's kind of what I want to focus on today. I think it's worth kind of talking for a little bit about how I got here. How do you become an associate professor of video games? How does that happen? 2003, which is longer ago than I'd like to admit, I finished high school in Toowoomba in Queensland. I went to Japan for a year because I was a nerd, and then I came back and did half an IT degree. It was like majoring in interactive entertainment. You couldn't call a university degree games back then, but it was as close as you could get. So I went and did that for 18 months or so. I then quit, partly because it was too hard and really stressful. Part I realized I didn't really like it. Part the girl I liked went to a different university. The University of Queensland, did a Bachelor of Arts. So then I went to the University of Queensland. I did a Bachelor of Arts and had to choose majors. And I'm like, well, I like writing. I guess I'll do creative writing. Did like poetry and novel writing and stuff. And did Japanese again, because I was like, well, I started that. Maybe that'll be something. Absolutely no idea what kind of job that would get me. I was just like, well, I enjoy these things. So let's just, and I've like given up on this IT degree. So let's just do this and see, let's just see where it goes. So then I graduated with creative writing in Japanese and no idea what to do. I was working at Woolies, so I kept working at Woolies. I was writing poetry, I guess. I won a poetry award. I got like $200, so I'm a professional poet. I think it was like a pigeon and a puddle. It was embarrassing. I literally don't have a copy anymore, thankfully. Anyway, and worked at Woolies, tried some other writing. Shock horror, the creative writing never became a sustainable thing. But while doing that, I also started kind of blogging about video games and doing kind of video game journalism on the side. Because I was playing a lot of games, obviously, and that side of like doing writing kind of led to that, which led to some opportunities. It led to me accessing a whole new community, and that led to me kind of eventually doing postgrad research in games, doing a PhD, and going down that path, and meeting a lot of people who are now doing a lot of things in Games Week, like my fellow panelists after this. Then I got a job teaching game design because I had a PhD, so I was teaching game dev students and also figuring out, well, how do I actually do this at the same time myself, started making my own game, and then moved over to QT, got a job which included some research, and that's where I am now. So like if somebody asked me like, how do you get a job at being an academic doing games research, I clearly wouldn't say, well, you need to go write poetry and work at Woolies for 2 years. Like, it's obviously not that pathway, but like the point here is that for any kind of, I guess, like intellectual or creative job, there aren't like linear pathways. It's not like you get like, you know, the a junior doctor, then you become a senior doctor, or a junior lawyer, then you become a senior lawyer or whatever. You kind of do things and then, oh, I guess I'm now doing this thing. They're kind of careers that make sense after the fact, so that when somebody tells you their story, you're like, oh, I can see how you got there. But then when you try to do it yourself, it's not going to be replicable in the same way. The similarities will be that your story is also weird. And that's really kind of like the main point I want to make in this talk, is that weirdness, that kind of non-linearity and only making sense after the fact that a lot of game dev careers have. I was over at GCAP for the last few days, the industry conference, some keynotes from people who've been around the industry forever. I think some are talking here as well today. And often very strange stories, like I did history at university and then I ended up in AAA 5 years later because I knew somebody. And I guess what I want to do today is kind of figure out how can you turn that into actually useful advice for what you can do, as opposed to just, well, I guess I better meet somebody who also can do that for me. So how can you prepare yourself for these kind of weird creative careers in the same way a musician might or a painter might, etc. Because I don't have much time and I'm already way behind where I thought I would be, there'll be some kind of just very broad stroke generalization provocations, and then in this panel we're doing right afterwards, kind of maybe add a bit more nuance to those, is my defense now. All right, to get started with, what do we already know about video games? What are some what do we know about them? Why do we want to kind of work in this industry a lot of the time, especially when students come to open days for Bachelor of Game Dev degrees, etc., or come to industry conferences. We know they're an important cultural form. That's probably something we all agree on. They tell stories, they express ideas in really interesting ways. All the games downstairs in Game Worlds kind of show that. They're clearly very important culturally. We all know that. They're a lot of fun. We can spend a lot of time doing these things just to kind of kill time or for leisure. Again, something we all probably agree on. And they make a lot of money, right? It's a massive industry. There's a lot of money there. Games like Among Us and Minecraft, Untitled Goose Game or Silksong, these games clearly make a lot of money. We've got some of the biggest media companies in the world. People love to say how they make more money than film and music, which is often, I think, a pretty bogus stat, but regardless, they make a lot of money. So it must be pretty good to work there and get rich. There are things we also know about video games, which you don't hear maybe quite so often if you're not kind of in the industry all the time, not often advertised on the posters at the open days at the universities. They're really hard and annoying to make. They require a lot of work. As one student said to me once, I didn't know I would have to make the bullets. I couldn't just put a gun in the scene and bullets would happen. I would have to tell the game, how do bullets work in this world? Just such fine detail. They're often actually made under very poor work conditions. Quite historically, this has improved a bit. Unionization has gotten a lot better. There's a lot more industry discourse about this. But over time, it's just been, extreme crunch conditions, unpaid overtime, people leaving the industry by their early 30s because it's hard to build a kind of sustainable career here. So a lot of burnout, a lot of exhaustion. A lot of people are look, the pay's not good enough for this, I'm out of here after about 10 years or so. And that's led to all other sorts of issues around institutional knowledge and reinventing the wheel because there's no one there to tell you how to make a wheel because they all left the industry. And this has been going on for decades. And again, it is getting better, but it's been pretty terrible for a long time. And especially outside of the US, and I think this is a really important one, small teams are the norm and large teams are kind of the exception to the rule, right? Your Ubisofts, your EAs, your Activisions, they're kind of the most visible ones. They're definitely the biggest companies, these thousands of people ones, Rockstar. But in the vast majority of the world, and definitely in Australia, a big company in Australia would be 150 people these days. The average studio size in Australia, according to the most recent IGEA kind of industry snapshot, was 17. That would be blown out by a few much larger studios. I would say the median's probably more about 10-ish, if that. And those companies are often made with groups of friends who aren't necessarily looking to grow exceptionally large as well, which then raises the question, well, if you want to get into the industry, what option does that provide you then? And so we don't hear about these things quite so often. And so these contradictions between there's a lot of money, they're great, they're really exciting, lots of people love them, and making them is actually really hard, and a lot of people don't actually have the greatest time doing that in terms of work conditions, are particularly kind of intense at the moment where there's this massive kind of global industry crisis going on. Since 2023, there's been 30,000 layoffs, overwhelmingly in California and the US, so maybe it won't affect people in this room as much, but it's been a bit of a rocky time lately after quite a big boom time late in the last decade. And look, that'll probably turn around again, and then that will turn around again. But at the moment, these contradictions about the game industry are kind of pretty pronounced for a lot of people. But, and that was a lot of like grim things, it's also like genuinely probably the most exciting time to be making games, regardless of whether they make money or not, just simply in terms of creativity, expression, the ease of access to like the tools to make games, the ease of access to audiences via digital platforms. Like it's probably never been easier to kind of do that. And that's, why we have such a booming indie industry here in Australia with lots of small teams, able to do things they maybe wouldn't have been able to do if like the mid-90s you needed to get shelf space at EB or JB Hi-Fi, which you don't need to do now. And so we have lots of incredible games like, where are we, like Cult of the Lamb and Silksong and Untitled Goose Game and Unpacking coming out of Australia and making a huge splash on the world stage because they can, right? Because like no one's stopping them, no one's saying we don't have shelf space for that game. And the tools are very easy to access. So it's a very exciting time to make games, even if the industry itself is kind of struggling a little bit. And ultimately, like, this shouldn't surprise us is kind of a point I'm trying to get towards, because like, this is really no different than being a musician, being a painter, being a writer, being an award-winning poet, like any other kind of cultural sector where we know this thing is an art form, we know working in that sector is weird, right? We know that like, someone isn't being like, right, I got my music degree, now I will quit my job and like wait till a band hires me, I'll just go give my CVs out to bands. Like that's not how music works. And that's not how most of the games industry works either. Like, of course there are companies with jobs and whatnot, but what those companies would largely want to see, I would imagine, and people can disagree with me in their talks later today, is like, well, have you made games? Because you can do that. And it's like, I used to tell my own students when I was teaching game design, like, no one cares if you have a Bachelor of Game Design. What they care is, do you have games you've made? And that's what that education was providing you, a time to actually make those games. And of course, societal privileges of having a bachelor's degree is very valuable. But like, have you started doing the thing as you would in any other kind of cultural sector? And the industry often doesn't position itself like this. The industry likes to position itself as tech. That's good for when you're trying to convince governments you deserve tax breaks, or when you're trying to convince parents to let their kids work in this sector and things like that. It just looks kind of a little bit more secure. But if you kind of go underneath and look at like the business models and the drivers of the people in this sector, and if you think about why you want to work in this sector, like it's for creativity and it's for cultural expression that kind of is like driving a lot of people. And if I go back to these games, like the story of each of these in different ways often isn't, oh, we like decided to make a thing and then we made the thing. It was a very iterative, we were just making things and then suddenly over time realized, oh wait, this thing's got legs, this thing could be a commercial game, or oh shit, this game is a commercial game now because something went viral that we didn't expect to go viral, right? Like Untitled Goose Game, like my understanding of that story is, like they were just making this thing, they weren't really getting paid for it yet, applying for a grant with Vic Screen, needed a trailer, put the trailer on YouTube, trailer exploded, and now suddenly this is like this next big hit. That's kind of my understanding of how that game kind of really kind of took off. Unpacking, I know, was Ren Breer's kind of like hobbyist side project while doing freelance kind of pixel art and whatnot. And then they realized, hey, this game's really good, and it became Witchbeam Software's kind of next commercial game. Hollow Knight before Silksong, they did a little game jam game. You can read all about it downstairs. There's a cool little book in the bookshop. And then that kind of grows into Hollow Knight and Silksong. Like these games didn't just, you don't just sit down and go, I'm going to make Hollow Knight. Like it evolves through making stuff. I think Julian's talking here, so I won't try to give a Cult of the Lamb story. But essentially what I'm trying to say is like the game industry is a cultural industry. It's not a tech industry. And again, I said I was going to use broad strokes. But if that's true, then game development careers are cultural careers and not tech careers. And this isn't a bad thing or a good thing. It's not like some pretentious thing, like you're more important than a computer scientist, or like you don't deserve to get paid as well as a computer scientist. It's none of those kind of value statements. It's more just trying to be really pragmatic about cultural careers work a certain way, right? As opposed to careers in other kinds of sectors. And so if you want to kind of do one of those careers, you need to think about, I guess, be realistic about what those kind of career pathways look like and how weird they are, how non-linear they are, and the pros and cons of that. So what does it actually mean? Like, what does it actually mean if game development careers are cultural careers and it is a cultural sector? And it's good and bad things, right? Like, firstly, as I kind of already said, they're very non-linear careers. They often only make sense after the fact. It's very hard to kind of find a linear like pipeline or pathway to start junior and knowing in 10 years I'll be in this senior role. A lot of game developers I interviewed asked them where they would be 5 years from now, and like practically no one had any idea, right? Like just, I think I caused a few people to cry by asking that question, and kind of probably conflicted my university ethics, but literally no one at any scale knew what they were doing. Josh Sawyer gave a keynote at GCAP yesterday, huge industry veteran, massive games like Fallout, New Vegas and whatnot. And he said like that he's never felt secure in his work, right? And he's like one of the celebrities in the game industry. So if he doesn't feel secure, what does that mean for everyone else? Pay is really poor or non-existent, like again, like many artists, but then all of a sudden it's really good, right? Your Untitled Goose Game or your Silk Song does really well. And so I guess now I'm well paid. Again, like a musician who's suddenly the next Taylor Swift or whatnot. But like, again, good things as well. You get to express yourself. You get to do something really meaningful with your life. I mean, that's why people want to work in games. That's why people are willing to risk for poor pay and the insecurity, because like you get to tell your own stories. You get to make something creative that brings joy to people. Like there's genuine value there, right? That goes beyond the monetary. And you can just do it, right? And which is kind of one of the main points I want to make as well, is that you can just do it. You don't need a qualification. You can just download Unity literally on your laptop on Acme's Wi-Fi and start moving cubes around that change colors when you click on them or whatever. Like you can just start making games. In the same way you can just buy a guitar and start learning guitar. It's not to say it's easy, but you can just do it. The barrier of just doing the thing is kind of non-existent. Yeah, cool. All right, so then, I've got left like 9 minutes, goodness. So if that's what these careers look like, if these are kind of the pros and cons of this kind of career, how can you actually kind of do that then, like as kind of a junior person? And see, I didn't want to talk about how to get a job in games, but rather how do you build a career in games? Because they're not necessarily the same thing, and you can start that career without a job is kind of, I guess, one of the main takeaways I want to have here. So I'm going to run through each of these. So firstly, developing a practice. What do I mean by that? I mean, essentially that game making is a process, and you need to develop your own processes and figure out how do I do this thing? How do I want to do this thing? Something I encounter with a lot of students and hobbyists or aspiring hobbyist game developers, the games they play look like this, or they look like Call of Duty, or even they look like Silksong, right? Like a big polished indie game that took like nearly a decade to make. And they're like, well, that's what games look like. So if I want to make games, that's what my game should look like. That's what my first game looked like. If I did it again, I probably wouldn't use Drake's Head, but times have changed. It was like there was a Unity tutorial, and I just kept adding bits over this kind of game jam for games called Learning Unity. It's on my itch.io page if you want to play it. And it's literally just a narrative about learning bits and pieces about Unity, like absolute trash. Like there's nothing commercially redeemable about this game, but it taught me how to use Unity, right? And gave me the confidence to then, and it showed me some features of Unity where I was like, oh, then I could maybe do this. Unity is a game engine, sorry. It's like a Photoshop of game development. I should have said that. So you need to make stuff to learn how to make stuff, right? Like if you want to become a musician, you need to start playing music. If you want to be a painter, you need to start painting. If you want to be a game dev, you need to start making games and just figure out how do these tools work? How do I approach them? What am I interested in with them? You need to train the muscle, right? And you can very easily get paralyzed by like, well, I think games look like this, so until I can make Skyrim, until I can make Silksong, there's no point doing this. But you need to just start doing the thing. And from the number of hands that went up earlier, I think I'm speaking to the converted on that. And that's not just about skills, it's about creative approaches, it's about your own disposition, and I guess what you believe in, when you work well, etc. This screenshot from the House Slack has gone a bit viral that they shared before. It's kind of the mythical origins of like Untitled Goose Game. It wasn't like sitting down doing like consumer audience research about how people's favorite poultry. It was about like, let's just make a game out of this, that'll be funny. And then they're making that game, trying to figure out what it is while they're making it. And then, again, as I said earlier, all of a sudden it's a commercial game that they're spending years on. So like, yeah, in creative work, you don't do the thing after you learn how to do the thing, like heart surgery or building bridges. You learn to do the thing by doing the thing. So just do the thing. And this is also why you should avoid generative AI as much as possible. Like the difficulty that generative AI makes easy is like exactly the thing you should be doing, right? Like the difficulty is the learning how to do the thing. Use generative AI for the things you don't care about. I think that's generally a good measure. And something I used to tell my students that video games aren't refrigerators, right? You don't know beforehand the value of it. Like people need to keep their food cold, therefore we need refrigerators. but like you're bringing something new to life, right? You can't know what it is until you start making it. So you don't want to be an ideas person who's just like, I have ideas and then I'll execute it once I have a good idea. Like you won't have a good idea until you start making things. At the same time, you should actually finish work. Like don't just make your dream game for a decade without ever releasing anything. And again, this means shifting your mindset about why a game should be released or why a game is valuable. And that means, again, moving away if you only play AAA or commercial titles. Games are valuable not just for commercial reasons, right? In the same way, playing music isn't only valuable for commercial reasons. And so you need to go through the whole process, right? You need to see what is it like to actually export this game? What is it like to ask to get people to play it and have no idea what I was actually trying to do? What is it like to try to get it running on a Mac or whatever else? Like both technical things and people things. So just actually finishing a game and making smaller games so you can finish more games is really valuable. So that includes like joining a game jam, just doing something for a weekend with a hard deadline, just cloning games that already exist, like just make your own Space Invaders to see if you can. Doing that stuff is incredibly valuable. And this often leads to new ideas. So like my only commercial game is Brendan Keogh's putting challenge. Thank you. It's not downstairs, but whatever. Started as this little like, it's fine. With music by composer Dan Golding of Untitled Goose Game fame. Anyway, it started as this little Pick 08 game, this very tiny little thing I made for free, chucked it on my itch page. A commercial, professional game developer I knew and I guess like probably respected, saw like my tweet about it, and it's about the boring bits of golf. It's meant to be a bit silly. And he was like, this is awesome, like what a great idea. And that was just enough motivation for me then to make a larger kind of commercial version of a game. As you can tell, significantly different graphics. The characters are a bit bigger. Released that game on Steam, but I wouldn't have done that if I hadn't made something and just put it out there in the world, and then somebody told me this is good, and then I made the next thing. And then I made it a third time because at this point I knew people liked it for the Playdate console. And like, so now I have a console game, which is really cool, right? And that only happened because I was just making things and putting stuff out there in the world. So it's valuable to do that. 3 minutes. I'm going to go a little over, Dan, sorry, but not very far. Fostering a community is really important. Like, you don't need to do this alone. Like, if you don't have a job yet, that doesn't mean you have to work all alone in your bedroom. You can have friends. To stress by this, I don't just mean like networking. Like, obviously networking is valuable and important, of course, but just literally building friendships and like finding people that you maybe can collaborate with or who can give you honest feedback. A game that is downstairs is Isopod by the Brisbane studio Spug. The people who work at Spug all met at Squiggly River Game Collective, which is not me taking credit for their game, absolutely can't do that. But like, they were just coming along, hanging out with other game devs. Briley at Spug made this cool little spider game that turned, well, just even a little toy things, like here's a spider, I don't know what to do with it, it shoots webs. Met Noah, met Melissa, and they were like, hey, let's like work on this into a full game. So just having a community is so important for generating those ideas and inspiration. It can be online, it can be offline. Here in Melbourne, there's a lot of great just in-person meetups in different groups. Lots of great Discord channels out there. Community is important, so have a community. You don't need to do it alone. And the Australian game development industry generally is really good at this. It's quite open because it's so indie. There's not as many like non-disclosure agreements, not letting people talk to each other about what they do. And so that means there's quite a supportive industry here in Australia, which is really, really great as well. Who just, hey, how do you do this thing? Well, here's how we did it. So yeah, have a community. A really important one is like, everything I've said so far about you can just start making games, they're creative, they're really meaningful to make. All those kind of slogans have been exploited for decades by people who don't want to pay people or don't want to pay people their full worth. Like, hey, look, I can't pay you enough, but making games is so awesome, so come make games for me anyway. And so there's a really tricky line here to walk, and there's no easy answers. It's just figuring out how to navigate it yourself, where you shouldn't wait until you're getting paid before you start making games, but you also want to try to not be exploited by people who maybe are making money from you not being paid, right? So the way I would navigate that is like, if I'm making games for myself, then I don't care if it makes money or not, because I own that value, that's my game. If it does go viral or anything, then that's all mine. If somebody was like, hey, come do an internship at my studio and work on this like $1 million franchise, but we're not going to pay you, but what a great opportunity, I think you should be much more suspicious of that, because they obviously can afford to pay you then. So, but then, of course, you also just need to make sacrifices to get a foot in the door sometimes, because sometimes what can you do? So how you navigate that is kind of up to yourself and your own financial situation. but it's just something I think worth saying out loud, that games are art doesn't mean therefore it's okay not to be paid if somebody else is getting value from you. So just, it's a really tricky one. All right, nearly there. Finally, and this could be like a whole talk in itself, and maybe it's something that won't make sense until like a few years down the track for some people, but we'll see how it goes. But like, you have to stop thinking like you're a gamer and start thinking like you're a game developer, like on day zero, essentially. So that really frustrates me with how a lot of universities and education places advertise their games degrees, which is obviously usually not up to the educators themselves at all. It's a marketing department somewhere else on campus. It's often like, hey gamers, you love games, so come learn game development. And the reason I went and tried learning game development in an IT degree was because I loved playing games. And it's just kind of, it's the wrong reason to do it, right? Like, just because you can love listening to music, if I'm going to like really stretch this metaphor out, without needing to become a musician. And like, there's very, very different skills involved, different kind of dispositions and values involved. And so you'd often get these students in game design who are like, well, I love Dark Souls and I love Call of Duty or whatever, so therefore I know how to make a good game. And you'd spend a good semester or two just trying to unwire their brain so you could start wiring it like a game developer and not like a gamer. And it just means you need to like figure out how to appreciate different kinds of games and appreciate games for different reasons. And I know that's really vague, but it's just something worth thinking about. Just as a brief example, you often on the internet in kind of gamer circles, like Reddits or whatnot, see these kind of like lazy dev discords, like, oh, the Rockstar used the same tree in Red Dead Redemption and what's it called, Grand Theft Auto 5, or in Starfield it only rains around you, it's not really raining. And as a gamer, you're like, no, my virtual world's not perfect. As a game developer looking at this, you'd be like, oh, that's a clever way to deal with this in this creative work, right? Because they're all smoke and mirrors, right? So it's kind of about shifting your mindset to seeing these games as these virtual worlds you want to be immersed in, and instead seeing them as like literal artifacts that somebody had to make, right? Because now that's you. And so often we'd have like new people kind of join the Squiggly River game Discord server and complain about some lazy developer and have to be about like, no, that's you. That's like, those are your peers now. So like, you need to kind of shift your mindset away from being a consumer to being a creator. Yeah, this is an important thing. All right, now the thing's flashing at me. So I'm pretty much done. This is my last slide. I felt like none of that was really concrete, so I thought I should just end on just an actual concrete slide of like stuff you can do right now to just start making stuff. Just download a tool, download a software. Many of them are free, or like Unity and that. They're kind of just like your hex debt, where like if you're successful, then they'll come after you for money, which is kind of good. It's like Unity or Unreal, great. Godot, open source. I use GameMaker a lot for 2D stuff. If you want to make something much, much smaller and constrained, Pick08, Twine, and Bitsy are really great places to start. Find a community, I guess I already said that one. Game jams are great. Itch.io, which is a great kind of open source, it's kind of like the Bandcamp of games, I suppose. They have a jams page and anyone can make a jam. There's a calendar there. And you're like, oh, I'm free that weekend. I'll join this game jam about cats and just make a game about cats. And then lots of people go and see what games were made about cats and you can get some audience there. And don't be afraid to make bad games, I think is really important. Like, you can't make a good game until you make a lot of bad games. So the sooner you start making bad games, the better. And final point is that none of this will guarantee you a job, which, again, to return to a negative point, but it kind of like, it buys you the lottery tickets, right? It gives you the chance to have that chance encounter or to encounter, to go viral with that one game or to meet that person who a few years later is able to give you a job or whatnot. But yeah, that's a lot of broad strokes. So I'm going to end that there. We can move on to the panel. So thanks, everyone.